is attorney Jim Peterson, the man behind Judicial Watch's lawsuits to get the truth about the dossier and the FISA application. So thank you very much for joining me today, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, so really quick, Jim, you've been with Judicial Watch for a number of years, and I've got to imagine that that these cases have got to be up there in ranking some of the more interesting ones. Talk with me a little bit about your experience here with Judicial Watch, and then we'll launch into sort of a discussion about the dossier and FISA and all of that.
Sure. I've been with Judicial Watch, from the second Bush administration through the Obama administration, and now the new administration, and we've witnessed some really remarkable things from our experience going to the Supreme Court in cases, from our battles on immigration. We've seen government corruption on all levels, but this issue, presents questions of corruption that involve they're widespread and some of the most troubling, because it involves not just corruption of the president's office potentially, but also the Justice Department, the FBI, as well as a very special secret court. I mean, the corruption runs through all of these, and getting to the bottom of this is critical to our country.
Yeah, so this is a big deal. This is very unique, and we're kind of in uncharted waters here when it comes to dealing with these issues. So let's take a step back. Let's talk about the so-called Trump dossier. Let's talk about the role that it played in sort of the genesis of a lot of this, and what Judicial Watch's role has been in trying to get to the bottom of this. So the reason why I really wanted to have you on was because all the way back in May of 2017, before really we knew very many details about anything regarding this, you were behind our lawsuit to get information about the dossier, Christopher Steele, and whatever relationship you might have had with the FBI. And this is well before most people were really talking about that. So give me some insights into why we filed that lawsuit and what we've learned since then.
Sure, absolutely. But first, I think there's one thing that would be helpful that we all should try to do. While we all talk about it as the so-called Trump dossier, I think we really ought to be calling it the Clinton-DNC dossier.
Yeah.
Because what we've learned is that it was a creature of, created and paid for by nothing other than the Clinton campaign and the DNC, and nobody disputes that. I mean, it's now widely acknowledged. So the Clinton DNC dossier, we've now learned since our first lawsuit reveals very startling information regarding the FBI's relationship with Christopher Steele. Now, Christopher Steele is often referred to as this former British intelligence officer. So immediately people's instinctual reaction, oh, it's James Bond, I mean, because we think of British intelligence officers, but actually this is a guy that, most importantly, former intelligence officer,
right,
had not been active in the field for more than 20 years because his cover had been blown somewhere. And at the time he's doing all this, he's nothing other than a paid agent of a political campaign. So to the extent that he keeps getting some sort of credibility because he's this former intelligence officer that the FBI allegedly trusted because of his background. I mean, that's really misleading to think of it that way. This was nothing other, the Clinton DNC dossier is nothing other than a political hit piece that many political campaigns deal in. Yet, they have used it. They used it through 2016 to subvert the institutions of government. How do they do that? Most importantly, they got it to the FBI, who was more than happy, apparently, without doing any the background work on its own, was more than happy to say, that sounds good to us. You know, I mean, Trump, nobody likes Trump, so we need to look into this because this sounds like something that's going to be interesting. Then they take that and they go to the FISA court. And from there, they take it back and run it up all the way to the President of the United States, Obama at the time, and use it to justify this surveillance of a presidential campaign. I mean, it's an extraordinary series of steps and use of institutions that are not supposed to, things are not supposed to happen that way.
Absolutely. So let's break down some of these steps here. First is the role that Fusion GPS played. Now, Fusion GPS, it's my understanding, had been hired in 2015 and early 2016 by the Washington Free Beacon, but that was sort of over in the spring, and then it was picked up by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. It was at that point that Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele, right, and then things kind of went from there. How unusual is it for information that's being gathered on behalf of a campaign to make its way into, federal investigations like this?
I think that's an extraordinary development, and it's only because the mainstream media is so determined to downplay this that we're not that there's just not shock across the spectrum. And we all know that if this was the other way around, that if a Republican administration was doing things like this to spy on a Democrat campaign, there would be, a meltdown in the media. But we have to remember this is really amazing. I mean, this is very comparable in seriousness, if not quite exactly in the details yet. It's very comparable in seriousness to Watergate, where political institutions were used to promote political ends, and governmental institutions were used to promote political ends. And we have to, it's really remarkable. The idea that, to answer your question directly, that campaign research, stuff that any and all political campaigns, try to put together to attack their opponent, could then somehow morph into the basis for some sort of a counterintelligence criminal investigation is really unprecedented. It involves, and we can talk about this more if you like, it involves a real corruption of the process of how intelligence, the FBI and intelligence agencies are supposed to go about their jobs, which they have to go about their jobs, to properly protect us and to use the court with the cooperation of the courts, to protect the rights of Americans while at the same time fulfilling their functions. And by subverting this process, it has not just an effect here, but it's going to have an effect, going forward because of the damage that's been done to the institutions.
Right, and that's problematic, is doing damage to these institutions that we need to be functioning well.
Exactly.
And we need to be able to trust. Let's get into some of that. So the first lawsuit that I referred to was our lawsuit surrounding the dossier, asking for questions about the relationship between Christopher Steele and the FBI. Now, back in May of 2017, this seemed almost like kind of a shot in the dark, this lawsuit, because so many details have come out since then. But at the time, we're kind of saying, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if there's some major relationship between Steele and the FBI, if there's communication back and forth, if there's payments back and forth. Flash forward to February 2018, where we are now, and tell me what we know kind of more in specific detail about how the FBI and Steele were working together and what that relationship ended up looking like.
Sure. We were early on, trying to probe into the details of this, and our lawsuit has been moving forward. Interestingly, in this odd world where the president seems to be on the other side of the Justice Department and the FBI, and as opposed to being the head of these agencies, the agencies have fought us at each step of the way on this lawsuit, and there's been a lot of progress made, but we're still fighting, because even though the president on an almost daily basis says that this information should be released, these agencies, apparently operating on their own agenda, continue to in some large important ways, continue to stonewall us. We're still fighting that. We're going to continuing to fight that fight, and in that lawsuit and in some other more recent ones. But what was your question more specifically?
So that's all extremely important information. When it came to the relationship between the FBI and Steele, I mean, we were kind of guessing that there was one at the beginning, right. But now we know that there was actually a pretty detailed sort of, it looks like, working relationship back and forth. What have we kind of learned about that?
We've learned, troublingly, that, as we said earlier, the Clinton and the DNC, Hillary Clinton and the DNC, paid through a law firm, of course, to hide their tracks. Paid a law firm to pay a research firm, which then hired Steele to dig up all this stuff.
Layers and layers and layers.
Layers and layers and layers, because who's ever going to know?
Right.
And so at that point, so they find this former intelligence agent, who then, not through any personal knowledge, not through any direct investigation, compiles this dossier, which of course is a fancy word just to describe, a pile of papers. This Christopher Steele compiles 35 pages of totally unverified and unproven accusations against the Trump team. Very serious charges. I mean, if you're going to suggest that a nominee for the president of the United States is, colluding with Russia, is misbehaving in extraordinary ways abroad, that his team is trying to arrange, behind the secret deals. I mean, these are serious things.
Serious claims, but you'd hope that there'd be serious evidence as well.
You would think that would be incumbent upon anybody, starting with the person putting it together, to do this. That wasn't what was done. It was a series of anonymous second, third, fourth-hand sources. Steele never went to Russia, okay? But I think it's becoming clear, and we are still a lot to learn on this, that the Russians, or some Russians, were feeding him things for their own reasons, probably. Why not? If you're them? I mean, if nothing else, the Russian government seems to enjoy causing a little bit of chaos,
sure.
in which they have done for decades, by the way, but the causing a little bit of chaos in the American political system if they can. So they found a willing recipient saying, well, we heard that so-and-so, did this. And what does Steele do? He just writes it down. And he writes it down, gives it back to the Clintons and the DNC, and says, look at these shocking things. I mean, this is why these are things that have to be passed along to the FBI. And they find another willing recipient to hear these things in the FBI and the Justice Department and of course Bruce Orr, the senior Justice Department official whose wife works at Fusion GPS, is pushing this along too. Everybody verifying to each other the seriousness of these things, because all they have is actually
whatever it is they Steele wrote down. Right,
wrote down in the first place for his own purposes.
Yeah,
and so the web here, I mean, is really becoming apparent of how this was a self-created effort on their part to create some sort of an issue that they deemed it would be helpful to them, and then it just became larger and larger, in cooperation with the Obama administration, happy to hear about these things. They not only made it a part of their campaign, which is people do things in campaigns, but they couldn't help themselves, and they involved all the institutions of government to not just to attack and try to discredit President Trump and his team, but also to undermine them and lay the foundation for what we've seen. Special prosecutors and investigations that go on now years. I mean,
right. And so, I mean, if this was a disinformation campaign or just a sort of a chaos campaign by Russia, it's been fairly successful in the way that it's consumed American politics. So now one of the ultimate goals of the FBI obviously was to use this information in the FISA process. FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of '78, established the FISC courts, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance courts, where you go to get a warrant in order to justify counterintelligence surveillance and that sort of thing. Right. Now what we've learned is that it was something that people suspected for a long time, was that the dossier played some role. But we now kind of know even more than that, right?
We do, and the fact that this is now relatively undisputed, what we have learned is most critical. First from the Nunes memo, and then the Grassley-Graham memo that came out of the Senate a week or so ago, now confirm some of these important facts about how the FISA process, and I apologize to everybody for we use these acronyms, but how this process of intelligence gathering, has been corrupted. And to me, that's maybe the most, putting aside, the shocking attempt to, use this in a political, use these things as, political campaign and for political benefit, to corrupt this process of the FISA court, is really important. And what we haven't learned yet, but I think we're going to learn soon, which is why we filed this lawsuit just recently for the actual FISA applications, because we need to know, and we now need to understand exactly what was said to this court and why this court granted granted these applications for wiretaps on the Trump people, because it shows potentially that not just the FBI and the Justice Department were fibbing to the court, but it appears to me that the court was a very willing recipient of this stuff, and granted permission to do this wiretap without the sufficient basis, because from everything we know so far, and all that was presented was really this Clinton-DNC dossier, which consisted of nothing on its face, consisted of nothing other than second, third-hand hearsay evidence, which is not enough for a warrant like that, to be able to spy on an American citizen.
Or at least it should not be enough.
Well, the law says it is not enough, and it should not be enough. But some judge on that court, and we need to find out more about this, some judge on that court bought into that. And that's really troubling, because if you see that if that level of corruption now just not goes from the campaigns up through the Justice Department, the FBI, but now is extended right over into this court that is a largely secret court that we all trust will behave in the way that it's supposed to. I mean, that's really troubling. I mean, what else was being going on if a judge on that court was so easily swayed by nothing other than wild political accusations that were ginned up by a campaign.
Right, and like you said, part of why we filed our lawsuit for the FISA application, for the FISA warrants, for the court decisions and communications back and forth with the FBI is because we want to know what all the different players knew. Now, you referenced the House GOP's memo, the Nunes memo, and then the Chuck Grassley's criminal referral regarding Steele to the Justice Department. And I'll just briefly tick through just a kind of like a few of the highlight things that we have learned from that. The fact that there was a heavy reliance on the dossier in order to obtain the application. The fact that this application didn't mention that the source of the dossier, the source of the funding was the Clinton campaign and the DNC. The fact that it used articles, specifically a Yahoo article that had been written with the source being Steele,
right,
to corroborate the dossier written by Steele, which is a pretty fantastic fact to me. And then the fact that just generally speaking, it doesn't seem like the FBI really verified very much of this. So, I mean, talk with me about sort of the flaws there and why this is problematic and why this leads us to really want more.
Right. I mean, the flaws there are really just startling, and the only solution here is what Judicial Watch always is advocating for, is transparency. I mean, we need to know. I mean, the memos that these congressional committees have come up with summarizing this are fine, and that they've helped shed a little more light on this. But what shed more light is the actual documents. We need see the FISA application. And usually those are secret for understandable reasons, because they involve, intelligence methods and in things. But this story now has reached a level of importance that There's no reason that can't be released today. President Trump can release that today. Okay, so that we have to see that, because there are these multiple steps of corruption here, of how Christopher Steele was happily used by the FBI. Persons within the FBI, as we now know, who also were very eager to undermine the Trump campaign. How they and this is not in dispute, as you say, that they did not reveal to the court, this FISA court, that the Clinton-DNC dossier was nothing other than a political attack piece. They had a legal and ethical responsibility to tell this court, that the evidence that they were relying on to justify their wiretapping was not just uncorroborated hearsay, but was bought and paid for by a political campaign.
And not just a political campaign, but the political campaign
of the opponent, of the target.
Right.
I mean, it's startling. And if this was the other way around, Washington would burn down in shock, and that if it had happened to a Democrat. But it's so important because I guess maybe because the Obama administration had been in power for so long or whatever, they were very happy and complicit in using the FBI and the Justice Department and this intelligence gathering process to do these things. And these are very serious things, and misuse of which can and should potentially, have criminal consequences for people that were involved.
Yeah. One thing that kind of really sprung out at me, and as an attorney, you can probably let me know how significant something like this is it was in the Chuck Grassley's referral to the Justice Department. He talked about, and this goes to kind of what we wanted to know about the relationship between Steele and the FBI. He refers to late in the presidential race. Steele had been basically told by the FBI not to talk to the media, at least according to the to the Grassley information that we have from Chuck Grassley. And then the FBI under Comey ended up sending a letter to Congress that they were very briefly reopening the Clinton investigation. And that kind of resulted in Steele breaking his agreement with the FBI and talking to a number of different media outlets about all of this stuff. Now, like you've been saying this whole time, a lot of what the FBI was doing was resting on the credibility of Christopher Steele, because he was gathering it from however he was getting it, writing it down, passing it along. Talk with me about the credibility of a source or of someone that you're working with when they start to kind of do end arounds around an investigation, which it seems like he did to some extent. Okay,
I mean, this is really, it's relatively simple, but it's relatively hard to believe. The FBI is conducting an investigation, has gotten a warrant to conduct surveillance based on, largely in their own words, largely based on the credibility that they ascribed to this former British intelligence agent, okay? This former British intelligence agent then misbehaves in their relationship with the FBI so significantly the FBI fires him, okay? Does the FBI inform the court, the FISA court, that the basis for the warrant has now violated their trust so much that they fired him? Does the FBI inform the court of this? No. They had a responsibility to inform the court that the very basis for what they're doing is the credibility of this person is now so diminished that they had to fire him themselves. Right. Okay, I mean, but that doesn't stop the FBI from continuing to do what it apparently wanted to do all along, which was to spy on the Trump team. I mean, it's hard to believe that that's all they had was in this. That's to me the first the House memo, the so-called Nunes memo, the House memo. To me, the most significant part of that was the statement that former Deputy Director McCabe testified to Congress that the investigation never would have been launched but for the Clinton-DNC dossier. Okay, that has not been, nobody who's contesting that he testified to that. Okay, so they knew, they were solely dependent on that. They knew, if not early on, I mean, give them the benefit of the doubt if you want for being sloppy or covering their eyes or whatever. They knew later on that this was not a trustworthy person. That's why they fired him. But does that affect what they're doing? Does that cause them to step back? No. And they had a responsibility, a legal and ethical responsibility to inform that court that the basis on which they had gotten this extraordinary permission to spy on an American was no longer there. I mean, but they didn't do it. I mean, it's hard to make that up. But those are facts that now, for what we now know, are largely undisputed. And we're only going to learn more about this. I think I suspect there was even more going on in terms of Steele, because he was unhappy about the campaign, how the campaign was going. Steele was going to the media outlets, hawking this story. I suspect we're going to learn more about how that whole effort was going on, because I think there was a concerted effort by the Clinton campaign ultimately to gin this up during the fall of 2016. And then, of course, as soon as they actually lost, they had to have a reason for why they lost, so they, turned this loose, in full force. But there's a lot more to learn there. What we do know is astonishing, and I suspect we'll learn even more soon.
Yeah, and that's, of course, what you are in court fighting to do. Because we've got the Republican memo. It seems like it shed some light on things. The Democratic memo hasn't been released yet, but Judicial Watch is saying, however we can get it release that too, because ultimately partisan memos are fine, but we want to see the actual documents at this point.
We deserve this at this point. The American people deserve this. I mean, the questions that have been raised about the credibility of these institutions, not to mention, the Clinton campaign or even President Trump. I mean, the credibility of all these institutions is at stake, and they have to do this so that the American people can be confident that these institutions are taking are doing things properly. Otherwise, we're no different than Russia, where the institutions of government are simply used to advance political agendas.
And we need to make sure that we're getting to the bottom of this, so that people know what happened, what didn't, and how we can improve things going forward.
Absolutely. So, we're doing everything we can and have made significant progress, and I think there's a lot more to learn soon.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being on. I'm sure that we're gonna, like you said, continue to learn more. I mean, it seems like every day new names pop up. Blumenthal pops into it. People like Cody Shearer, all of these different things, and so we just want to get to the bottom of things. And I'm glad that you were kind of ahead of the curve in trying to get to the bottom of the dossier. I'm glad that Judicial Watch is now fighting to just get all the FISA stuff released, so we can really see what really happened with our institutions and what happened in 2016, what happened in 2017, and what's still happening now. So thank you very much for being on, Jim. We'll have to have you back as we hopefully continue to learn more. So, and thank you for joining us today as well. Make sure to continue to follow all of Judicial Watch's work. Until next time, I'm the host of Inside Judicial Watch, Jerry Dunleavy, and have a great day.